What's up, everybody? Welcome back. We're here with some more NFL DFS picks and lineup advice. This time for the single game showdown slate Thursday Night Football Week 4 on DraftKings and FanDuel. It is the Dallas Cowboys and the New York Giants. Welcome. I'm Brian Jester, co-founder here at Occupy Fantasy. In this video, we will discuss the injuries that impact tonight's slate, some low risk and high risk lineup construction tips, and just general strategies, tips, and picks for the biggest contest that both sites have to offer. Let's not waste any time. Let's jump right into it and let's look at these injuries. Now, on the offensive side of the ball, there's one receiver that I wouldn't say we're concerned about, but we are monitoring his status. It's Darius Slayton for the New York Giants, dealing with a hand injury. And while he did practice all week in a limited fashion, finished last week's game, and most beat reporters do not seem concerned about his availability, we still have to monitor because if he is out, that does leave a lot of snaps and a lot of routes to be run by Jalen Hyatt, the second-year man. He's only $600 on DraftKings. Now, again, we fully expect Slayton to play, but if he doesn't, this would open up some different builds, and it would change ownership dramatically based on Hyatt moving into that wide receiver 3 role. So let's monitor that throughout the day. The more likely and the more impactful injuries are on the defensive side of the ball. If we pull up the depth chart here and we see this is the New York Giants. Now, they were missing Nick McLeod last week. They are getting him back, but they are missing this week and tonight Adoree Jackson, the reserve corner. While he is a reserve, he does get a couple snaps and a couple coverages per game. But the most impactful is Drew Phillips, their nickelback, their slot corner. He's going to be out. So, slot corner against Dallas. If you look at the routes run by Dallas, their receivers, who's running which routes. Let's go to Dallas's depth chart here just so you can see. And by number of slot routes, the raw number, it's CeeDee Lamb. So we get CeeDee Lamb against a backup slot corner for a vast majority of his routes. And then we have Kevontae Turpin, who's the backup. He has the highest percentage of slot routes. He's not running a ton of slot routes or a ton of routes in general, but almost all of them are from the slot. And then even Brandon Cooks and Jalen Tolbert, they get 25 to 40% of their routes routes run from the slot too. So all these guys get a bump with the Giants slot corner being out. Speaking of corners being out, Kalen Carson, starting outside corner for Dallas, is out. That just gives a big bump to Malik Neighbors. And whether it's Darius Slayton or Jalen Hyatt on the outside for the Giants, Wan'Dale Robinson, primarily a slot guy, so he doesn't get any bump from this inactive for Dallas. But just to recap, we have big bumps for all the Dallas receivers and bumps for the outside guys in Slayton, Hyatt, and mostly Malik Neighbors for the Giants. Now, if we turn our attention to low-risk contests, 50-50s, double-ups, head-to-heads, just where you have to beat half the field to double your money. You've seen it many times on this channel before. We try to lock up all the scoring by playing both quarterbacks, both running backs. That way, if a touchdown is scored in the game, we generally almost always have a piece of it. Now, that can be a little difficult tonight because of the split backfield in Dallas. And the pricing allows us to do this. Let me just show you really quickly. If we captain the favorite Dak Prescott, we play Devin Singletary, Daniel Jones. Rico Dowdle has been getting more work than Ezekiel Elliott in the last couple of weeks. So ownership prefers Rico Dowdle as well, as do most projection systems. That leaves you 5,200 because then you can play Brandon Aubrey, who's apparently just a really good fantasy player. Look at his game logs, 11 points, 17 points, 21 points. That's like Rashee Rice. That's crazy. So Brandon Aubrey, going to be popular as well. He's a great high floor, high ceiling option. And then you can play the Cowboys defense. You can play Wan'Dale Robinson. This fits in really nicely. The problem, obviously, is by doing this, you're leaving out two of the highest ceiling guys on the slate in CeeDee Lamb and in Malik Neighbors. If you look at optimal lineups, the field is going to, in low-risk contests, pick one of these guys, whether it's Lamb or Neighbors. Most likely Lamb, and they'll leave out one of these guys here, probably Singletary. So something like this, punt the final position with one of these guys, Deuce Vaughn, who gets a couple snaps, Daniel Bellinger tight end too. Maybe something like this. It's a little dangerous because the ownership doesn't necessarily flow to our typical construction, but we can build high floor, high ceiling lineups with the two running back, two quarterback approach on DraftKings tonight. And surprisingly, it's even easier on FanDuel. Prescott, Daniel Jones, Devin Singletary, and Rico Dowdle is actually priced a lot cheaper than Ezekiel Elliott at $8,000. So at least $11,000 per player. We could play Cooks, Robinson, Jake Ferguson, Aubrey, whoever we want. Again, we're leaving out Lamb and Neighbors here, but they are, at least are a little more expensive. They're a little harder to fit on FanDuel. I feel much better about this construction on FanDuel tonight for low-risk contests than I do on DraftKings. But again, both are viable and both are in play. One word of caution, though, if you look at the Dallas running back situation, let's go back to DraftKings, and we look at touches, opportunities last couple of weeks, we see 10, 11 targets for Rico Dowdle. We see 23 rushing attempts. We look at Ezekiel Elliott, much less, especially in the last couple of weeks. We see 19 rushing attempts, and we see just 7 targets. Now, I will say, Dallas has not had one normal game so far. Every game script has been super wacky. They blew out Cleveland. They got blown out by New Orleans, and they were trailing by multiple scores against Baltimore for pretty much the entire game. So, rotational receiver snaps, tight end rotation snaps, running back snaps, all this has been screwed up by their game scripts. Now, have a normal game challenge level impossible for Dallas? Maybe. But if they do have somewhat of a normal game tonight, we'll at least we'll get a look at what they intend to do every week at all their positions. And maybe they will as a favorite here against the Giants, but hard to say. So we can try to extrapolate what they've done so far, but we can't guarantee that what they've done so far outside of CeeDee Lamb, outside of Jake Ferguson, what they're going to do with the rest of their pieces and how they intend to use them optimally. So we all are still, despite 3 weeks into the season, kind of guessing how they want to use Jalen Tolbert, how they want to use Rico versus Zeke versus Deuce Vaughn versus Hunter Lepke, the fullback who's got some work recently as well. How much they want to play their number 2 and number 3 tight ends. Really tough to say. So again, we're all guessing, and let's lean into that uncertainty for high-risk contests, which is a great transition to talking about leagues, GPPs, satellites, contests with exponential payouts on DraftKings and FanDuel. The reason a lot of you tune in to these videos, let's talk about it. Let's get the water sip first. Let's get hydrated. And if you've been around for Occupy Fantasy the past couple of years, if you watch these videos, you know that once week 4 starts, also if you read our free NFL strategy guide, free on our website, if you've been struggling with NFL DFS, go read it. It's a great way to run down how to play NFL DFS strategies, tips in that guide. And if you watch these videos, you know about our underperforming wide receivers. They start in week 4, which means it starts this week. These are receivers that have seen a lot of opportunity in recent weeks, namely the last 3 or 4 weeks. And for whatever reason, drops, unlucky, getting tackled at the 1-yard line, overthrown balls, poorly thrown balls, whatever reason, they have not met their fantasy expectations based on the routes they run, how deep their targets are, where their targets are on the field. All that said, you're asking what the bottom line is. Historically, underperforming wide receivers are cheat codes in NFL DFS. These guys explode at much higher rates than their ownership and their salaries would indicate on weeks where our model marks them as an underperforming wide receiver. Good news for us, we actually have one tonight in tonight's game. May not be who you're thinking about. It's actually Brandon Cooks, Dallas Cowboys. Based on his targets and his usage, has been expected to score about 30 fantasy points so far this season. As you can see, he's only scored around 20. That technically classifies him as an underperforming wide receiver, despite actually scoring a touchdown in week 1. So the nice thing about this, Brandon Cooks is kind of in that weird pricing spot, that 6 to 7K wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3 that we typically see on showdown slates. We actually don't expect his ownership to get over 20%. We don't expect his captain ownership to get over 1 to 2%. So again, most underperforming wide receivers, we want to hammer them when they're studs. We actually have a pretty extensive list this week of really good players, so make sure you check out our content later in the week for the Sunday and the Monday underperforming wide receivers. But it's hard to ask for much more on a showdown slate when we get a guy who's 1 to 2% captain, a guy who's 15 to 20% flex, and he's marked as underperforming. So Brandon Cooks, the best high-risk play overall tonight, whether it's in small field or large field contests. And again, I don't think I have enough influence to get his ownership over 20%. Maybe we do. I don't think we do. So even if we're telling all of you to play Brandon Cooks, his ownership should still stay in check with his massive underperforming wide receiver ceiling. That's potential for tonight. All right, some other notes and thoughts on high-risk contests tonight. If you know, we talk about differentiation, players that are less than 20% owned. In addition to Brandon Cooks, guys we expect, based on our projected ownership, in our Occupy model, in our lineup builder, that we expect to be under 20%. Let's talk about some guys here. Kevontae Turpin, who I mentioned is having that nice slot matchup with the Giants slot corner being out tonight. He's technically overpriced. He's $4,000, under 5% projected ownership, probably a large field play only. But again, we know they do design plays for him. 7 targets. What was it? 7 targets the last couple of games. So not the worst thing for a $4,000 player on a slate where pricing is pretty tight. Got me so excited about underperforming wide receivers. Need some more water. Now, the first 3 weeks of the season, we've seen really loose pricing and we've seen really mispriced players at the bottom, but we don't have any guys under $3,000. Maybe Darius Slayton will qualify here, but guys that are clearly mispriced, projected for 5+ points in this bottom tier, that cause us to go more stars and scrubs and get the middle priced out. That's not the case tonight. Yes, we'll see Tyrone Tracy. He might approach and exceed 20% ownership in small field GPPs. It won't be that in large field. Theo Johnson, starting tight end for the Giants. Yes, he's starting. Has combined 5.1 fantasy points through 3 weeks. No one's super excited to play him. He'll probably get over 20% in smaller contests, not over 20% in the largest GPPs on DraftKings. As a result, we'll actually see ownership on Brandon Aubrey, Cowboys defense, even some on the Giants defense as well. Greg Joseph, the kicker. This will be probably the highest kicker defense ownership slate we've seen in primetime so far in 2024. So just keep that in mind as you're building. You can play more scrubs at lower ownership than you have in previous weeks in high-risk contests on DraftKings. All right, who else we got here? We got Hunter Lepke, who I did talk about, right? Fullback, technically, but he's played all over. Has played inline, tight end, had a couple slot snaps, has been the sole running back in some passing sets for Dallas. And again, a lot of this is game script based. We don't know how they actually want to use Hunter Lepke, but you have a guy who's $800 who has scored 3+ points in 2 out of 3 games. He should be somewhat popular. We don't have him super popular, 5-10%. Maybe he gets over 20% in small field GPPs. But another guy who can, if you just play Lepke and you can jam in some more studs, just be mindful of the studs you are jamming in, because a lot of the Lepke builds will look similar, so you don't want to get duped too heavily. But he's a guy that could score a couple of points, probably the best chances for points if Darius Slayton does in fact play tonight, and Hyatt is not this wide receiver 3 who's going to run 30+ routes. So keep in mind Hunter Lepke. And again, talked about Daddle versus Zeke. They're roughly the same price on DraftKings, right? If I can scroll up. Dowdle is $6,400, Zeke $6,200. We have Dowdle over 20%, approaching 30% total ownership. We have Zeke 10% based on the last couple of weeks of work and how projections are shaking out. You look at the difference on FanDuel, and you see Zeke at 11,500, and you look at the field and projections and say, why would I play Zeke at 11.5 when I could play Dowdle at 8K? It's a no-brainer. However, we do not know how they want to optimally use these guys. Dowdle has been better by every possible metric. Does that mean the coaching staff thinks that? Does that mean the coaching staff doesn't want to get Zeke the ball more? We don't know that. So just a great point of leverage tonight is playing Zeke over Dowdle at a third of the ownership, a fifth of the ownership maybe on FanDuel. So really interesting to think about. If you're looking at just 1 point of leverage, one pivot away from one guy. Now, it's easy to do on DraftKings where the pricing is different. You actually end up with a completely different build by playing Zeke on FanDuel. That is just another way to get different, another reason to do that. Just to be clear, though, Dowdle is the better play. But again, we should not be confident in that based on how the first 3 games have played out for Dallas. Let's see here. Anything else we want to talk about? All right, let's close it out with some FanDuel MVP discussion. Dak and CeeDee Lamb, we expect to combine for around 2/3 of the MVP ownership on FanDuel, 60 to 70%, probably closer to that 70% mark. The field is going to build Dallas heavy in general on both sites, 5-1 on DraftKings, 4-2 on DraftKings. More so on FanDuel, though. We're going to see a lot of 4-1 Dallas lineups, a lot of 3-2 Dallas lineups, 4 Cowboys, 1 Giant, 3 Cowboys, 2 Giants. So you can lean into that uncertainty or that certainty by the field, and you can play more Giants-heavy lineups. That's another easy way to get different. But also, Malik Neighbors, 8% MVP projected ownership, has the most expected fantasy points in the league. So yes, Malik Neighbors has balled out, 24, 26, only 9 points in week 1. But his usage indicates that he should be scoring this many points. 18 targets in week 2, 12 last week. He's the real deal. And literally leads the league in expected fantasy points. And we can get him at 8% MVP on FanDuel. Really great large field GPP play. And if you're playing 20+ lineups, 150+ lineups, I don't see how you don't go way over the field on Neighbors at MVP at that number. All right, I think that'll do it for this video, though. Let me check back. Yeah, we got everything covered. If you have any additional questions, players I didn't talk about, drop a comment below. We love seeing the comments. We love getting back to you before the slate starts tonight at 8:20, 8:15. 8:15 Eastern. So drop a comment. Discord is the other way to reach us, occupyfantasy.com/Discord. Chat with other members of the community, sweat out the games with us. And please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. We ask every week, and I do hate asking, but it is mutually beneficial. We're trying to get to 10,000 subscribers. We will be doing a giveaway once we hit that number. And yes, you'd be shocked, but more subscribers is better for our channel. We appreciate the help. It also lets you know when we post these showdown videos, when we go live on Saturdays for our live Q&A, when we post any other videos for other sports, DFS or betting related. So make sure you're subscribed. And I just found out, maybe I didn't find out, but it was a reminder that a non-zero portion of people watch our videos on TV, on the YouTube app, on TVs, not just phone and computers anymore. And it's actually a little harder and takes a little more work to subscribe on there. So if you take the extra couple seconds, move down on the TV, click that subscribe, we would really appreciate it. And give us a thumbs up. That's the easiest free way to support the channel. Daily plug will be out on OccupyFantasy.com with rankings, strategies, and tips and slate notes. That'll be out this afternoon. And our model that I've referenced with projected ownership and all of our rankings, that is already up and running for tonight's slate. OccupyFantasy.com is where you can get that. So Brian for Occupy, thank you for listening, and good luck in tonight's Giants and Cowboys showdown slate.